we've been doing these silviculture Q&As since March. This is what, third or fourth one. We really appreciate this. We are recording this session, and we will post Bob's these sessions on our website, mainwoodlandowners.org. So I will let folks who haven't made it today know that it will be there. It will probably be on our members page. So if you're a member, you have access to that page and can see Bob's videos. If you're not a member, you should become one. So visit our website, you can join online. So without any further ado, I will pass on Bob. I also say Jess, his lovely wife, is here, and she does a great job kind of facilitating a little bit too, and maybe even answering a few questions herself, so, and putting things in context. So I appreciate you both being here. And again, yes, happy birthday, Bob, and thanks for sharing your birthday with us today. So
mostly my job is just reading the chat box and other things, because it's hard to multitask and all of that. But yeah, I think we have a really nice small group today, so we should be able to have some good discussions about your individual woodlots. And I thought that a good starting place might be for Bob to talk about, since the last call-in show that we had, things that we've been up to on our own lands. And then also there's been a lot of interest in that backpack chainsaw, the Husqvarna 535 FBX, and Bob's got an update on that as well. So,
well, let's talk about the saw first. This is the Husqvarna 535 FXB, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Or FBX, whatever. Been telling people that if you want one of these, you can probably buy it from Canada. The company is in, that I got mine from is in Prince George. One of our members followed up on that and was and learned sadly that even Canada no longer imports these things, and you cannot buy one there. So in addition to the U.S. where they've never been available. So I asked Rick Morrill, the Baxter Park forester, 10 years ago or so, who bought the first one of these after seeing it on the web somewhere. He bought his directly from Sweden, from a big forestry equipment company in Sweden, and sent me the link to that and said he was able to actually, put one into the shopping cart on the website, and, you want to buy one, they'll sell you one. So the other member that I was talking to has finally accomplished that, and apparently has one en route. So I went in and the video that's on the my YouTube page, linked to the main Woodland Owners page, now has, I checked, 116 views. I can't believe this. This was just up this is like rock star status for a forester. Right. To get 100 views, man, you're in heaven. So in the description of that video, if you read it, I put in a link to the website in Sweden. So this individual had a problem initially. They refused his credit card. I think that's just being protected, right? They're buying some expensive item in Sweden is not something you normally do. So if you have that problem, just call them and they probably will fix it. So that's the story. And I don't know what the shipping is, but the price was only, what, 800 euros or something, right?
Yeah.
So that's what is that, about $1,200 or something, or if that? I don't know, actually.
Yeah. Plus the shipping and stuff.
It's much cheaper than what I paid. So that part is good news. So
I think it'll be a good test case, so we can we'll keep track, see how long it takes for the shipping for it to get over here, and whether that system seems to work. It's a little intimidating to order something from Sweden and have it shipped, but we'll do a test run with this one and then see if we can recommend it.
I guess the other silvicultural thing we've been up to mainly was about 10 days ago. No, yeah, we sprayed. No, it wasn't even that long ago. We sprayed for the white pine weevil, something I'd never done before, and I think we nailed the timing. There's a video about that also on my YouTube site if you want to watch it. It's all 20 people have done so, which is interesting. So we'll see whether it was effective. You can't really tell. The timing is everything with the weevil. I think we got them right when they first have emerged. If they had laid eggs in the terminal, I didn't see much evidence of that. So hopefully We killed the weevils that were out and protected the shoots from subsequent attack. But you don't really know, of course, until maybe 3 weeks from now when you start seeing the dead leaders turn over. So we'll be out and report on that.
And beyond that, we've been doing some boundary line maintenance and location finding. And then we did, for the first time ever, we actually had some access trail work done, something I've been hesitant to do because it's sort of an infrastructure cost. But we had a very small excavator come out to fix some rutting that we had on one of our tree farms, and the outcome was amazing. We've now got this really great loop for our Kubota, and I have no regrets about spending that money to have access that doesn't involve either inaccessible to the Kubota and having to walk and lug water or chainsaw gas cans and things like that. So I was a little skeptical of that at first, but now I'm a huge fan and would recommend it to other landowners.
Yeah, I think we estimated there was 4,400 feet of trail needing rehab. He did that in 2 long days, say 20 hours probably. That's going to be a $2,000 bill for that small excavator. Well worth it in our minds. So yeah. That we spent yesterday seeding down the steep slopes. He also, a lot of the fussiness actually is in water bars. If you have steep ground, we wanted to make sure you had water bars constructed to the BMPs. Some of this was like every 70 feet, right? Because we're on pretty steep slope. So it's just excellent now. Hopefully we need some rain, right? To now make our grass seed grow. It's just very dry out there. You normally wouldn't even do this kind of work this time of year, but it was just bone dry at places. Unbelievable.
Good.
Terrible year for regeneration. If you're trying to regenerate naturally, if you read my column a few months ago, this whole period we've just gone through, this middle of May till early June period, if it's dry like this, and seedlings germinate maybe, but the roots don't reach the mineral soil or a stable source of moisture. So this is going to be a disaster for natural regeneration. If it's as dry as it is throughout Maine. I don't know about up north, but around here we haven't had a decent rain in 3 weeks at least. Yeah. And the garden is dry. I'm almost tempted to water it. I haven't done so. But that means, this early critical period when those little seeds germinate there's not going to be a good outcome, sadly. Bugs are not bad though. I mean, there's no perfect alignment of the planets here for weather.
Let's hear from you all. What have you been up to? And as you're doing these woodland activities, what questions are you running into?
Bob, this is Richard Nance. I have a question about the machine, basically. You and I had an offline chat about this, but I was just, I guess all this does is show my lack of forestry training when I watch you with that machine. Because I'm one of those people that looks at, it has to look nice, basically, when it's done. I'm impressed with it. I'm not impressed with all the stuff I should be impressed with. If it looks nice, I'm okay. So I watch you.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But I watch you with the machine. I was just shocked to see you just cutting these trees off about waist or chest high, and then walking on and cutting the next one off. So when you're done, you end up with this stand or this little area of poles sticking up in the air.
Yeah.
How
about that?
Gnome canes, they're called.
You know what? You may not even get you out of the woods. There's 7,000 of those stubs now in a 12-acre stand. So it makes it, you're right. It's a very bizarre kind of appearance in the woods. However, when you go back 4 years later, those have all rotted off and you don't see it being hardwoods, right? They're just beech in this case. So that aesthetic doesn't bother me. I guess it makes the reason we do it is, of course, the work goes way faster, because you're not reaching down in the ground, or you're not risk hitting rocks and stuff sawing near the ground. So you could certainly do that if you wanted to with this saw. You'd have an angled cut. It would be harder then to apply the herbicide, because the herbicide is going to want to run off, right? So you want a horizontal surface there. Just spray around the rim, and you will take it out. And there's really no reason other than the aesthetics, I guess, to cut low stumps like we would if we were logging, of course, to get better utilization. So
now some people who don't use the herbicide do believe that if you cut it off higher, then you can sort of inhibit the root suckering that happens. So So that's,
Right.
it's somewhat untested.
That's right. That's not well established. I think what happens is that some of those trees sometimes, they're say 3 feet off the ground, they'll form what are called stool sprouts around the rim of the cutoff place instead of suckering. And those sprouts, now you've got even a more bizarre thing. You got this 3-foot stub with all these little pollard beech sprouts coming out of the top of it. Those are not going to be particularly competitive, though, to whatever other vegetation you're trying to favor. Release. In our case, it was mostly conifer advanced regeneration, red spruce primarily, and pine in the understory and mid-story. So we're trying to take those out. So
one more question about that. So
Yeah.
I noticed that on some of the trees that maybe were 4 inches in diameter, so it looked like you were making a partial cut through it.
yeah,
And then what? And then just it would, so you cut
So
it
that-
up so that when you sprayed it, it would kill the tree, but you
that's
didn't topple it over.
right. That's a labor-saving device. Also, you can cut off up to an 8-inch tree easily with the saw, but those are usually, the crowns of those are usually so big that, and you can't really control the direction as well as you can with a chainsaw. I tend not to do that because they're going to come down and maybe damage a lot of what you're trying to protect. Much easier to kill those in place. So this is a simulated hack and squirt treatment, as you would do with the axe, right? Instead of hack around with incisions and injecting the herbicide in the incisions, you just kerf it like on 3 sides. You don't necessarily have to be complete. And then you just spray herbicide in those little slits. So very quick and dirty, and that works fine. So those will die standing and forms, the other benefit of that is that you keep these bigger ones up there. They're used by all kinds of woodpeckers, insects. Again, it's a bit of a different treatment, but we are getting NRCS cost share under one of it's mechanical brush removal, I guess, or whatever it is they call it.
I think
Anyway, thanks for doing that. It was a great video, and I was just shocked, but I'm still getting used to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing is that two sort of emotional reasons. One is when you're done, if you cut them off real low, you can't see what you did. And so we have this satisfaction of being able to see every single tree that we cut. And then the other is because we do host a lot of tours of landowners and foresters, it's really effective for them to visualize just how bad our understory beech problem was, to still have those high stumps there, and to also see that they've not sprouted and regrown. It really brings home that message. And we had visitors. It was largely a group from New Brunswick that was just like of foresters, just that couldn't believe what they saw. They didn't realize you could overcome this understory beech, and I think they were planning on going back and starting to grapple with the diseased beech.
One of them bought 3 saws, actually.
Yeah.
The last 3 in Canada, perhaps. I don't know. 1 in Truro and 2 from Ontario. One more thing that needs to be said about this. I don't know if I said this before, but there is, if you cut off a tree maybe 4 or 5 inches, a good size one, near a beech you want to keep. Mm-hmm. Like you might have these not really nice, nice in a wildlife sense, 12, 15-inch old gnarly beech that are good mass producers and are alive. We keep all those, right? They're not that numerous. Or resistant ones that are perfectly clear. We have those scattered around as well. I learned the hard way because I was actually spraying stumps done from a logging job right after the harvest, which is another way to keep the beech from suckering. And that was incredibly effective, but I also killed one of my residual beeches that I wanted to keep, I'm sure, because it died. There's no other reason for it to die so quickly. It just withered early the next growing season. And I'm sure what happened is that these beeches are all root grafted below ground, and it's probably sucked. I was treating probably a 10-inch beech stump, so I put a lot of herbicide on that, and that was just enough for it to suck into the other tree being root grafted in the transpiration process and probably killed it. That's a phenomenon called backflash. So if you're doing this work and you want to save some beech trees, we just cut the competitors off and don't treat the stumps within maybe 15, 20 feet of that crop tree, residual beech. You wouldn't have to worry about that for other species because they wouldn't be root grafted. So that's another detail to be careful of.
I'd encourage you to think about it as with a scientist mindset. So one thing you could do, Richard, is you could do, you know, set an area aside that you're going to cut these beech trees down at the ground level, and then and see how you feel after you know, stooping and bending low to do all those, and then weigh against the aesthetics that you get, and then do another area where you're doing the knee high, and just compare how you know, how quickly, how much physical exertion, and then watch it over a few years to see when the stumps fall, or when the cutoff parts decay enough that they fall to the ground on their own, and just sort of try it like an experiment and see what works given all the things that go into it. Some people try herbicide, not herbicide. You can set up your own little experiment.
I've got one more application of this saw that's just, it's another one of these things that everybody says you can't do, which is just, to me, is just a challenge, right? If you tell me that. So everybody says you cannot get rid of Japanese knotweed, right?
Oh.
It's like, this saw is just absolute death on the knotweed. Like you wouldn't even, I've seen knotweed patches where I'd even dare wade into them with any kind of tools other than this. Because this, you got your saw out in front of you, right? So you just hack down the knotweed. In this case, I am cutting pretty low, right? I'm now down nearer the ground, knocking this knotweed off. You do that twice. You do that in the, say, beginning of July, right? Right when the root reserves are at their minimum, right? So the plants have sucked all the stored sugars out of the ground, form tops, knock them completely back, make them resprout, come back in mid-August, knock them back again the same way. So now the root reserves are really depleted, but a vigorous patch of knotweed will come back again, as if people have learned, if you're not doing it, the whole package. Then, and this is the key step, you go in late September, as late as you possibly can, watch the frost before it freezes, or late September, early October, and spray over the top of that with about an 8% solution of glyphosate in water. And that's a 99% effective. You will have a few stragglers you can deal with by mop up the following year. The saw makes that all possible, actually. Doing that with a chainsaw would be very tedious and laborious. Going in with a machete and hacking away just be a non-starter for me. But this saw makes it possible. I could go into the knotweed eradication business. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy, really, to just cut that stuff off, because once you have it down, it's easy to walk through. And in 2 years, your knotweed is gone from like a jungle that you cannot walk through to gone. I mean, gone out of the picture. And the key is really that late. People go out there and get anxious and they spray the knotweed too soon, right? Like if you sprayed knotweed right now, it would be absolutely ineffective. It would burn the tops off, but it doesn't do anything in the physiology. The key on herbicide, at least in the case of this knotweed where you're doing foliar spraying, you want that the period of dormancy that's just about to start you want the plant to be in that condition, rapidly translocating sugars and stuff from the leaves back to the root system. So if you spray late, as late as possible, actually, late September, we did it the last day of September, I think, this year, and it just lights out for the knotweed. Very few sprigs coming back, so that's another great use. And then the other uses of them are trail and boundary line maintenance. It's really an all-purpose tool. So anyway, probably enough about Husqvarna sales pitch, but it's a good saw.
What else is going on in people's woodland lives and questions that you're running into?
This is Nate Freeman here. Hi, guys.
Hey,
Hi, Nate.
So first of all, I came in a few minutes late. What is the name of that saw again?
It's the Husqvarna 535 FBX.
Okay, and this is a spacing saw of some sort?
Yep.
It's a backpack chainsaw, Nate. If you you want to go look at it on the video, go on the MW webpage, and I think it's behind the firewall. There's a link to a video I made of this.
Yeah, if it's on our members page, there's a video of Bob using this equipment. And,
right.
Okay, and it's on the members page of the MWO, or?
Of Maine Woodland Owners. Yep, MaineWoodlandOwners.org. And then you go to members page. And then if you're a member, you have the password.
Yeah, Nate's a member. Last I checked.
Okay, good. If you don't have the password, I'll give it to you.
You can go on.
Okay, I'll try and deal with that later. I don't want to take up time on that right now, but thank you. So I have a question about, you know, in my woodlot, which I guess you've seen, you know, I have a real good trail system, and I will just mention one thing about machinery on that for anyone else who's doing trail stuff. A zero-turn backhoe or excavator is much handier. You can do much narrower trails and stuff. That really made a difference. I've got some good trails and some that are way too freaking big, and the good trails were all done with a zero-turn machine.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we have.
Yeah, so that's one thing I just wanted to mention. But I have been cutting. You know, I've been doing basically crop tree release, hardwood crop tree release, mostly oak, maple, and white pine where it's applicable, although it's not a good white pine site. And what I did a patch cutting of about 10 acres in about 5 sections, about 2 acres apiece, where everything got cut except for crop trees that had already been kind of given a start by cutting their competitors for, you know, 4 or 5 years in advance, and then everything else went down except for the crop trees. I've not had much problem with epicormics, but it seems like some years the poles, 6 to 10 inches, will go nuts, and there's other years nothing. Last year there was no epicormics at all. This year I'm seeing is bad, and a couple of years ago I had one where I had poles that were deep in the woods, completely shaded bowl and everything else, and they were putting out epicormics. And my answer to this has been that, you know, it's a hobby farm. I go through and I take the damn epicormics off when they are, you know, less than pencil size, no blemish, but it's an incredible amount of work. And I'm wondering if you have any insight into anything I could do with it then.
So why don't you talk about what is epicormic branching and when does it happen? Yeah, so
just for those that might not know what Nate's talking about here, the epicormics are a stress reaction of buds, dormant buds in the cambial layer. So they're different, so they will, those buds, when the tree is stressed, like a heavy crop tree release, and that now, so the bole of the tree was formerly in the shade of its competitors, now it's daylighted from a harvest treatment. That sometimes engenders a stress reaction on the tree. I think mostly just because it thinks, if you will, or it's responding to a stress that where the reaction is to produce more foliage, okay? And it has that mechanism. And I think that's also a mechanism like if the top gets blown out of a tree or something like in a bad ice storm, you know, it's a survival process. So that's what they are. So this is a stress reaction. Now the way, now Nate, do you know about leaving trainers? You probably do, right? On the south side of the tree, if you have like hemlock or lower shade tolerant species,
yeah,
that you leave close to your crop trees that are competing?
To some degree, that was, you know, I've been pretty wary about taking the stuff on the south side when I've been doing the hand cutting. Right. But with this mechanical cut, it was, I didn't want to leave stuff that would regenerate undesirable regeneration. I'm trying to convert this all as much as possible to hardwood. So we did do some, you know, if it was possible, we left something there on the south side. But I'm wondering whether this is simply that this is kind of a weird dryish site, and whether this is more of a water reaction rather than a sunlight, that these trees are sort of on the margin anyway, all the time, and that might make them, you know, more susceptible, and whether that needs to be taken into account more than I did.
That's a good, I don't know, I cannot think of a study that looked at that issue. I'm just trying to think about it physiologically. I suppose that could be true. I would think, but if you're saying you're getting epicormics in the untreated stand, that could only be from, so that will happen. The only experience I have with seeing that, it's usually from a defoliator, like gypsy moth. That when I worked as a graduate student in Connecticut, and you would frequently see the bad defoliated oaks would, where the tops were completely stripped, like for multiple years. would then put out epichromix, especially white oaks, not as much red oak, but all the oaks would do that, and other species too. So it may be if you had these are red oaks, Dave, and doing this.
All red.
Do you have the brown-tailed moth there by any chance? Not, you're down in where?
I have not seen any defoliation of any kind.
Well, then that rules
these
out.
are all pretty healthy trees, and like this one very small, and you know, it's a 50-acre lot. As I say, it's a hobby lot, so I'm thinking of stands that are sometimes as small as, you know, 50 feet across. There'll be like half a dozen trees that I'm treating in a sense as a distinct stand. And I had a stand that was dropping its lower branches every year. It was almost perfect spacing. They grew from wrist size to now they're 6 to 8 inches. Yeah. And then 2 or 3 years ago, we had one year where all of a sudden these things are putting out epichromix on totally happy looking trees. And I just rubbed them off the outside, and then last year there were no epichromix at all because we had all that water. Or that's my explanation anyway. They were completely happy. But then this year again, they are starting to put out epichromix, and this is a dry year, as you pointed out. And I'm wondering if maybe I spaced them out a little bit more so they didn't have the water competition or something.
You know, I'm skeptical of the water hypothesis. I mean, I don't. Okay. It's hard to. I mean, but that doesn't mean it isn't have some merit. When trees are under drought stress, they tend to just shut the stomates in the leaves and stop photosynthesizing to conserve the water that's available. And this time of year, even though it has been dry, there's really no moisture stress yet. It's when the drying goes down, you know, by mid-July, early August, you can get down deeper in the rooting zone that you can get into issues. So I don't think that somehow these trees must have been stressed somehow. It's one of these things that if I actually come down and look at it, I might have some ideas, but I don't really. If there's no defoliation, I can't imagine what else it's doing.
Okay.
Well, I think, Bob, the other thing would be part of Nate's question was it sounds like he's pruning these epichromix branches off, and it's a lot of work. So could you talk about what epichromix branching does to the wood quality, and is it worth pruning, or could you leave it, or what are the consequences?
This is, as Nate is, of course, a connoisseur of fine woods as being an instrument maker. So he probably understands this better than most. But epichromix on hardwoods, they're unlike a normal branch will originate at the pith of the tree and traces outward, right? So if you saw a board out of that on a normal branch, and I talked about this in my last column, you will have a knot in the board, right? It's the cross section of that branch. Epichromix, because they originated on the bark, just under the bark. If you prune them off, you will have no defects really. There might be a little tiny canker if that happens to end up in the face of the wood, but not much. That will overgrow right away. And so if you're willing to prune off those epichromix, I mean, if you had some potential veneer logs, you'd only really have to prune up to 9 or 10 feet, right? That's the top of a veneer log. Now, there's no real market for veneer logs longer than that I'm aware of. So even picking them off as soon as possible would be a good practice. There's only so many of those buds too. I don't know that once you get a stress reaction like that, whether there's another supply that forms. I don't think so, but I'm not certain of that. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess Bob brought up a good point that it would be good to, one of the most valuable continuing ed programs that I went was one on wood scaling and how the different grades of wood from pulpwood that goes to the pulp mill all the way up to these veneer logs. And you probably don't want to invest your time in pruning future pulpwood that you're going to get paid by the ton for a low price. But if you can identify just those trees that are of really excellent form that you do have veneer potential from, those might be worth investing in your time into.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for calling.
Who else? Do we have another? No? group.
I've got more if nobody else is going to say anything.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you actually mentioned something about the limited supply of the dormant buds. Is that each year they are forming these dormant buds, or is that the tree itself forever has only so many dormant buds?
Oh, you know, I'm pretty sure it's the second, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. It's one of these phenomena about trees, which are amazing organisms, right? That could be better studied, right? I'm not certain of the answer to that.
Because I've been sort of hoping that eventually these trees get to a point where they simply stop putting out epicormics, and then I can just leave them. And the very big trees are not doing epicormics. I mean, I've got,
right.
12 to 16-inch trees that are not doing this. But the 6 to 10s are the problem,
Well, that's another well-known part of epicormics is if releasing trees that have been partly, somewhat suppressed, like an intermediate crown class tree that's, it's worth releasing because it has good form, but otherwise not that vigorous. If you daylight that, then you're certainly gonna. So the more drastically you change the competitive environment, the more likely it's going to happen. That's why big, strong, dominant trees don't do it, right? So again, it's the stress reaction. So that part is right, and I think sometimes I think I've pruned. You see this. It's more of you can see this on phenomenon like arborists, right? They'll prune these things off, so you can walk under the tree, and then sometimes that same pruning site, will form even more shoots, right? They'll come out again next year.
Yeah.
That's the same point. So that implies that they actually are producing new ones, and that may be what happens. I'm going to try to read about this, and get an answer, but I'm not sure.
I've been trying to not make it less drastic by taking out competitors before the bigger cut, and over a period of 5 years or so. Take like just 1 or 2 trees next to them, give them a little bit more of a start, and that, but I can't tell what would have happened if I didn't do that. So not exactly a controlled experiment, but that's what I was hoping would do this.
Yeah, and that's the problem as the trees acclimate to the new, more open environment, they're going to become more dominant and less stressed, presumably, and therefore less likely to put. For those buds to be released. What happens is the mechanism is those buds are there, and the reason they don't grow normally is because there are auxins, or chemical hormones that are produced in the elongating parts of the shoots of the trees that are then translated down through the vascular system of the tree. And if those auxins are present in that system, that impedes the development of those, or inhibits the development of those buds. Once those are missing, again, defoliation is the common reason for this. Then those buds are released, right? The extreme example. This is when you cut the tree off, like at the stump, and up comes stump sprouts, right? Those are the same things. Those are just epicormic buds down there on the top of the root system. So it's just really no different than that.
Bob, I've got a question on my own property. I've got about, one of my favorite spots is it's about 8 acres of almost pure red oak. And no evidence of harvest at all. And I've been stymied at what to do. It's about probably 80% red oak, 8 to 12 inch size on the oak, some white pine scattered in and with it, and the rest is probably red maple.
Yeah.
Dominant red oak. As I say, there's no evidence there's ever been any management on it.
You think it's old field?
It must be. I'm assuming it was. It's old ag land. That's the only way I can figure out how this happened, because there's a lot of pine around it too. But this is almost pure red oak. It's just So I've got, for a long time, I had a little bit of white pine regeneration kind of sitting real low, and I said, well, I'm not going to worry about that because I'm really focused on the red oak, and what to do there. But every time I had a harvest, I haven't thinned it at all. But the last few years, the white pine regeneration has really started to move up, and I don't know why, because it's a fairly fully occupied site, but the white pine regeneration and there's mixed in some hemlock and some fir and spruce, but white pine is clearly the dominant understory tree. They're starting to get 5, 6, 7 feet tall now. So I'm trying to figure out what in the world am I going to, I'm looking at this high quality oak, and then I'm seeing this pine. I don't want to lose the pine regeneration long term, but I also don't want to, I'm trying to figure, I've got almost a 2H stand now, essentially.
Yeah.
Or the makings of a 2H, but I'm trying to figure out how to manage that overstory oak and bring the pine along, at the same, and mix, because it's a really nice site and really high quality, very high. The oak is, probably 80% of them are high quality red oak trees. So
beautiful. All right.
So what do I do? I haven't done it. So in the absence of knowing what to do, I've done nothing.
Right.
It's pretty typical.
That's a decision, right?
Yeah, the decision was don't screw it up, so I don't do anything.
It sounds like if there's two pieces of evidence here that are somewhat in conflict, right? It's a fully stocked oak stand, and yet there's enough, you say, there's enough light leaking through for the pine to develop an understory.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, pine, of course, will grow under oak. It's partly because it leaves out so late and drops its leaves, right? So there is that's one reason certain ephemeral herbs exist under oak and not maple. It sounds to me like if I my own land, I would probably thin that with a semi-crop tree approach, kind of I say a fairly light to moderate, but not heavy crown thinning. Taking out taking out any of the merchantable intermediates you can, and occasional weaker co-dominant that's competing with your crop trees. Oak stand at the end, let's see, this is 12 inches diameter.
Probably 8 to 12 inches.
8 to 12, so 10 is an average. So you probably have room for, that'd be 300 oak trees per acre would be fully stocked. So at the end of that rotation, you're down to a tenth of that, right? 30. When they're nice big veneer logs. So yeah, you can certainly afford some kind of thinning. The challenge, of course, will be to try to do that in a way that doesn't damage a lot of this pine. And the more you procrastinate, Tom, the worse problem that's going to be, as you know, right? Those trees get even taller, right? It's hard to work around.
I know.
Well, that is one of the dilemmas of shelterwood management, especially extended shelterwood, where you're developing these saplings, which is generally biologically a great way to manage most of our forests. But you have to have excellent motivated loggers who know how to protect that stuff, which you can do, of course. I think it's a little harder with hand felling, actually. I think this is a case where mechanical felling works well, as long as you don't worry, as long as you get in there on the right conditions. Even cut the length can work, right? For that size wood, that would be a nice cut the length job. They could work around that pine. Try to cut the tops off at the stump, right? Or instead of dragging them through.
Right, don't drag anything out because you're going to wipe out all the region.
Yeah, that's it. So I think a light thing would do both. That would favor your crop trees even more, and it would keep the pine growing.
So the trick would be go identify the crop trees first and get those clearly identified, and then say, okay, now I'm going to focus on just releasing around those crop trees with a careful light thinning around that. That's what you're talking about, right? Yeah,
that's what I would do. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't identify more than maybe 50 to the acre, right? At most in that stand. And that's going to be, what, a quarter or a fifth or less of the trees, right? And then you can, and for something of that quality, I'd ribbon those, and then I'd go back through and I'd paint to cut too. I'd do both steps. So this is your land, right? You got the skill to do this. And then it's very clear what you need to do. You could just, some people just mark the crop trees and then just tell the operator, okay, just cut every tree that's competing. That sounds like it might be a little too drastic in your case. We could ask Nate if he's still on, how he controlled his. Nate, did you mark your crop trees, or did you?
I marked the crop trees themselves. Yeah.
Did you mark anything to cut, or did you mark to cut?
No, mine was done as if it's not marked, cut it. Because there was no desirable regen at all, and I wanted to keep the undesirable regen gone. So I just marked the crop trees, and everything else went down.
Yeah. Okay. So that'd be too heavy for Tom's case. You'd lose all the pine regen and probably some other at least medium crop trees that can go to 16 inches or something. So yeah.
Sometimes you just think that people focus too soon on regeneration. Is that a possibility here? Do you want to talk about that situation and how it fits or doesn't fit here?
Yes, it's just kind of a sobering process. You have to realize how long, you have to ask yourself, let's just take Tom's case. So you got 10-inch QMD diameter oak stands. How many years is it going to be before those are, to the size you want to grow them to? It would be at least twice that size, I would think, to get the maximum veneer grades from the butt logs. And plus top logs. If you've got a good site, you're going to have a lot of top volumes there too, yeah. two or three log oak trees. I would grow that. You probably have at least 2, maybe 3 more thinnings before a final harvest there, I would think. So regeneration really is premature at that. If you think about it, you're going to carry this pine for 40 years, but if you can do it without damaging it, why not do that, right? But it shouldn't trump the right. objective of growing your oak.
That's been the part of the dilemma, because when it was just the regeneration was really very low, I said I'm not going to worry about that. Yeah. It's not going to grow. This is an oak stand. It's going to grow. It's got a lot of life left to it, and I'm just going to focus on the overstory. And then I start seeing all this pine come up underneath, and I'm thinking, I could just ignore it again. I could just ignore it, but gee, it's already there. I've got the right species, a really great species growing there. How do I manage that, that overstory, but also the understory at the same time? And maybe I've thought about it too much and said, I should focus on the overstory. If this was anything but nice white pine, I'd say, let's go in there and, wipe out the regeneration in a thinning. But it's so good. The pine regeneration is so good in there.
Yeah, so I think a light to moderate thinning done carefully to protect the pine. You won't protect all of it, right?
Right, and I don't need to. There's a lot of it.
Will serve both purposes, and you should do that. You should go out and mark that this weekend, Tom.
Okay, I'll be right there.
and then put it on video, Tom, and then we'll post it on.
I may take some pictures and send you some photos of before, and just say to see if I described it accurately.
Okay.
All right. Next up, we have Roselle's question. Did you turn on your video? Yeah, please ask your question. Oh, she's muted.
Unmute. Muted.
There.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for letting me get in a question. I'll try not to take too much time.
No, please.
I have just under 200 acres in the Kentucky area, and because I live in New Hampshire, it's a little hard to manage. But I do have Forestry service, and there's an 18-acre stretch of hayfield that belonged to my great uncle and was farmed for a long time that hasn't been farmed in well over 30 years. And so I thought we would be putting it into either alfalfa or hay, but that's not happening. And so I've over the years had a really hard time just keeping the hayfield open. But I'm thinking, if that's not working, maybe I should be watching what I'm reading and acting on it by saying, what are your recommendations about the possibility of planting quality trees? Because there's an abundant amount of water. There's an underground river that comes up near there.
Uh-huh.
So there's an abundant amount of water. What do you think? Am I crazy to be trying to push foresters to plant?
Now, before I answer your question, does this land happen to be on the Stetson Road?
No, but it's not terribly far.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, because I own 60 acres on the Stetson Road, and your property sounds like one of the abutting properties, actually. But nevertheless, so this is a common issue, I guess. Maybe used to be more common than it is now, where you don't want the field to just revert, right, to get what comes. You want to actually control the process of. It
was cut, I think, a little less than 10 years ago, but I'm thinking, my notes, I'm saying, hey, when do I start the thinning? Maybe I should, I've got to call in to the forester I work with to say, shouldn't we be doing something about this? And isn't it time for a forestry plan? And I'm thinking, maybe I could get you guys to give me some suggestions on what would be the appropriate thing, because I don't have that much experience with it. I've often lived in other parts of the country or overseas. And I'm thinking, I need to listen to what you have to say and act on some of your suggestions, I think.
Okay, well, without, I would need more details to really get into the management of your established trees. The field issue, you're thinking about planting the field. That would be expensive. So the one question to ask your forester is, what do they call them? Technical service providers, TSPs, for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Okay, so they can, you can get cost sharing for this, to write, the steps would be to first write a quality management plan. How many acres?
That's
200
kind of
acres?
what I'm thinking is best thing right now.
200 acres. That's what's the number on 200 acres?
1,400
It's
bucks.
just under that. It's like maybe 183 or something. I don't know. It's somewhere
Well,
in
you
that.
get substantial money to pay the forester to write a plan, and then once you have this plan, there'd be the forester's judgment. He'd have to, or she would have to look at the site quality.
What's the reasonable cost for that kind of a plan?
Yeah, well, then you see, once you have the plan itself, what they will cost share, we've done plans under 100 acres for, I think, about $1,400. I think above 100 is more.
But so you sign up with the NRCS, and then they let you know that you've been approved for that cost share amount. Many of the foresters, at least in the Bangor region, charge that same amount. And so there's—
You mean about the 1,400 for the plan?
Yeah. So it ends up costing you nothing. There's some time lag. You have to pay the forester, and then you get reimbursed by NRCS. So there's a slight time lag. But yeah, certainly you'd want to talk about costs, but it should be minimal out-of-pocket costs for you. And then the planting, you can talk about the planting idea. When we've put in for this NRCS funding, the cost, we get reimbursed about $4 per hardwood tree, fully protected, and the out costs are about $6. So we're paying $2, and then that ends up, making it more affordable. Now, if you wanted to plant conifers, those are less expensive because they're less attractive to the deer and things like that.
Yeah, when I tried to first bring it up over the last couple of years, I keep nudging on the subject, and they say, oh, you can't plant anything because the wind will just blow all the trees down. And I thought, that's not what's happening in Canada. We're getting killed there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I would see if you're in Kanduska, have you talked to there's a network of state foresters who can give you sort of independent opinions about this. Mm-hmm. If you want that, Terry Coulong is the one that's based in Old Town. You should works for the Maine Forest Service, and she'd be excellent. She would give you good objective advice. One advantage of is your land, is it in the tree growth tax program? The forest land, at least.
I hope it is, but I'm not dead sure, and that's another question.
I have heard people, if you've got frontage, the town's going to tax you, especially if it's field, right, as buildable land at $25,000 an acre, right, or more.
So far, they aren't.
I've heard of people planting land just to get out of that, right? So it's no longer in. You could there are other, of course, open space options if you wanted to conserve it for that.
Say that again? I couldn't hear that phrase.
Sorry,
something space something.
There are favorable tax programs for keeping land in open space that's not forest. Those are funded a little differently or calculated a little differently depending on the amount of conservation, permanent conservation that's applied to the land. Yeah, so that's another option. That doesn't sound like that's your motivation though. So it sounds more like, my sense is if it's field, generally, as I look around Maine, almost everywhere I go, the remaining fields are almost always fairly good land, right? It's the last land the farmers didn't abandon, right? We own hundreds and hundreds of acres that got abandoned by 1900. It grows some decent trees, but boys, I can't imagine growing crops or hay or anything on it. steep, rocky. Whereas a decent hayfield, something that somebody's mowing, right? There's, it's probably decent soil.
It's rocky. It has an old farmstead on it. And at some point, I think there may have been a shingled barn because there's a lot of slate on the ground in different places. But it's
cool.
the water. I want to protect it because of the underground river that comes out and flows into the Kenduskeag right there. And that means that a certain amount of the frontage, which is pretty substantial, on the Kenduskeag can't be done anything within, 200 feet or
250,
1,000 feet or something.
250, I think. Yeah, typically.
I'll give you Bob's email too, so that we can, especially since we're neighbors, this would be fun to get personally involved.
Yeah,
in,
contact me personally, and I can probably get more help to you, and we can have a dialogue about this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to negotiate for when I can come.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm told that it is going to be tricky to even come. And so.
Right, we can stay apart. It's one nice thing about being a forester.
Yeah,
I'm not so much concerned about anything that's outdoors.
Yeah.
When I can get
we can stay outdoors.
moving around outside. I do a lot of rose gardening in New Hampshire, but I loved what you were saying about the trees and the sprouts. I have a rare, the local Morin that does landscape here in our detached condominium subdivision, and they put in a blooming almond, which they said would never survive. Well, it's been up there for like 17 years. In the last year, it got, maybe 2 years back now, it got a double freeze late, and it did die off. But it's got all these sprouts, and it's the funniest looking thing you can see right now. And there's 4 gigantic hosta under it. And I'm thinking, they want to come in with a backhoe and they want to dig up the tree stump. And then they're just going to break up the hosta. I said, no, the hosta are going right back where they were. But it's just sprouting. You gave me all the right terms to deal with an almond tree this week. And I'm thinking, wait, I was supposed to hear you guys today.
We've had a lot of fun planting things at the northern extent of their range, and probably the most southern species that we've planted the furthest north is up at our camp, which is in T3R9. Bob, a native of Ohio. Yes, Bob has planted a pawpaw tree or shrub, the wild banana, and it is getting frozen. You can see
every
where
year.
it kind of gets frozen, but it, we planted 3 stems, 2 of them died. Now it's back up to 2 stems and it's leafing out, and someday we're gonna have wild bananas up there.
Isn't that funny?
All right, we're gonna try. It's at least something to, every time when we open up the camp, you go see if the pawpaw's still alive.
Yeah.
All right. And it does have a wonderful level of water. And so I would think some of your high veneer trees, wouldn't they need a fairly good amount of water?
Yes, I mean,
there's some red oak in there, but not a lot.
Right. Yeah, the red oak can get by better than some. I mean, things like the maples need more water typically. Cedar, there are some species that thrive on wetter soils, some of our ashes, and yeah, planting old fields is very tough, especially if you're talking about hardwoods, because you have to protect them from deer browsing, right? That's the key limiting factor, and then dealing with the competition from the grasses. So it's expensive to do well if you want to put in hardwoods. Conifers are much cheaper and more accommodating to all this. They're not really browsed heavily except for the cedar. White pine would be a great choice, but it gets attacked by the tip weevil once it's up, 5 or 6 feet tall. So there's
red pine here. How does red pine work in Maine?
Red pine is, if you have wet soils, I would not plant red pine. It's you associate red pine with actually very dry, sandy soils. If you plant red pine on deep, mesic, wet soils, it will probably grow really well for about 20 years, and then I think it would be attacked by a number of the pests that attack red pine. It's it's native, you're right, but it's only native really to certain fire-prone, droughty sites where there's not a lot of competition from other species. Places like blueberry barrens and where you have the ericaceous, blueberries, vacciniums in the understory. This red pine. So I doubt that you have much of that in Canduskeg. I don't have any red pine on my lot there. You do elsewhere.
No, but there is plenty of ash, cedar, and maple.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a more music place. I think I'd want to plant, I'm just thinking spruce would be if you're trying to reforest the old field. There's several different choices for spruce. That's just where you'd get into the weeds with the forester about this. Yeah. And I'm happy to advise you too. So yeah, let me know when you're in Maine.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's the time though. So Jen, you want to take back over?
Yeah. Thank you, Bob and Jessica. That was great. And I know that there's probably more questions out there. So I encourage anybody, if they have any follow-up questions. Bob, is it okay if they send an email to you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 So
in each of my columns, right? That you can.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And there, Jess put it in the chat. You can see Bob's email. Whose phone number? Is that Terry's phone number as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Terry's email and phone number, and then Bob's email.
Okay. So we really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll have another one of these. We are competing with nice weather. So people are less willing to the computer to listen to Bob and more willing to be outside and enjoying the beauty of Maine.
Yeah. Right.
So thanks and have a great birthday. And thanks to everybody for attending. Again, check out our website for more events. Our next one is TikTok on Tuesday with Alyssa Ballman, who's from the University of Maine. She's with the Maine Tick Survey. And that's already been, we've got a lot of registrations, but we still have room for that. So please join us by going on our events page and then clicking on registration, just like you did for this event. Thank you and have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.